Welcome to the Renaissance and welcome to this edition of Biafra History and Slave Trade Part 1. In this edition, we shall be looking at Biafra, but not the history of Biafra per se, but where it all started. There's a misconception today where some people believe that Biafra was created in 1967 because of the Nigerian Biafran War, but we shall be looking at whether it existed before or not. Have you ever heard about the slave trade? Biafra, Birth of Biafra, Kingdom of Biafra, Nigeria Biafra War, Igbos from history. So we shall be looking at where is Biafra, when was Biafra created, how did Biafra disappear, who desolated Biafra, Biafra and the slave trade. Note that not all these will be covered in this part, but this is just the beginning to establish that Biafra existed prior to the creation of Nigeria and that the desolation of Biafra was part and parcel of the slave trade. Above all, that Biafra today cannot exist independently is a form of slavery. As usual with this channel, we shall be referencing old books and materials written back then. Remember, one of the reasons why the slave trade was possible was because the Negroes and Negroids were said to be having very short memories, as in they forget easily. They don't look back and forward. They just dwell on the moment. So we shall be looking at these back and history back in time as our proof of whatever we're saying. So if we reference a book called Atlas Geographus or Complete System of Geography for Africa, volume 4, and it was published in 1714. Note 1714. So it means the document is about 300 years old. So 300 years ago is what we're talking about. So we'll see what the book says about Biafra or the Kingdom of Biafra. It says, Depa bounds it on the west with Benin, with some mountains on the east, which separate it from Midra, and extends it southward to the 4th degree of north latitude. Lois observes that some geographers give this name to all the country which is bounded on the east by the lake and river of Niger, on the north by the kingdoms of Borno and Zamfara in Negro land, and on the west by the Benin and Gulf of St. Thomas. So we need to always remember that even the descendants of former slaves do not even know, most of them do not know that there is something called Negro land. They all believe they came from Africa. Here we see what the kingdom of Biafra or Biafra was like then. Remember, this was published in 1714. So on the same book, we see where it looked at the table of Ethiopia. Because remember, Ethiopia you see today is not the same Ethiopia that you see in the Bible. If you looked at old maps, you would discover that a lot of things have changed. And this is because the Europeans understand how to change things to whatever they want, and because the Negroes and blacks are most of Africa just follow their leader. They just wait for someone to tell them. They don't initiate things themselves, so they just follow whatever is being said. So if tomorrow they go back and change anything, all they need is to push it into the schools, and that thing becomes the new way forward. So we look at the table. It says a table of Ethiopia, and it tells us that the kingdom of Biafra or Biafra, you see the ones highlighted in yellow, and you see Gabon kingdom highlighted in purple or pink. Gabon is there today as a country, and that's kingdom of Biafra. It's no longer there. It was probably desolated by the slave trade, because from our research we did notice that as time went on, between 1714 and around 1870, Biafra mysteriously disappeared from the maps. It was there up until 1870. Some books showed it. Also, if we reference another book called Universal Gazetteer, a concise description alphabetically arranged of all the cities of the known world, whatever that means, but we're just interested in Biafra here, written by John Walker and published in 1815. We see where it tells us about Biafra as well. It tells us that Biafra is a kingdom and its capital in Negro land on the river Los Cameroons, which is Cameroon River. southeast of Benin, latitude 1010 north, longitude 1740 east. So now we have been able to at least prove beyond all reasonable doubts that Biafra existed prior to the creation of what is called Nigeria today. However, we shall go one step further to look at other things as well. You may be wondering, okay, if it existed, how come there was a war? The war was never about Biafra or no Biafra. The war was because the British, the Europeans, and Americans believe that that is a slave farm. That's the only thing they understand about the area. And as far as they have the Fulanese, if you have watched the series, that is what is going to be happening. You remember in that war, every effort to get a ceasefire for negotiations never worked. It is a war that was fought by Europeans using their proxies, who are the Fulanese, who rule it till tomorrow morning, whatever their reasons. So the important thing to note is that when there is war in Africa, it is never really about the people fighting themselves. It is the Europeans and Americans creating war using the people they can use, most times the Fulanese and other non-Negroes. It is never about the same people killing themselves, just like the slave trade, which we have been able to prove. The problem is that mainstream media and mainstream academics does not allow you to step out of the confines of what the Europeans, the slave masters, have defined for you. For example, you can't go and present something that is contrary to whatever they have told them in the school system. Nigeria, for example, has removed history from its schools. This is a way to obliterate that history, to remove the fact that at some point there was people being captured and sold from there. There was that war, and there were other ills being meted out to the Negroes or Negroids, as you choose to call them. But the biggest question here is, if there was Biafra prior to the creation of Nigeria, why does it attract war, violence, the moment it's being mentioned? If you ask any Nigerian around you, the next thing they're going to tell you about Biafra is just war, because that's how most of the people there grew up. That was what they knew. That is the only war on earth that there were no rules of engagement, no holds barred. Hunger was legitimate. Killing children and women were legitimate targets, because the Europeans and Americans saw the Biafrans and the Negroes as slaves. And as far as they were concerned, whatever they could do, because these are slaves in their view, this is exactly what they did during the slave trade. So it's no news. That is why no matter how many people the Nigerian government kill, you still see them being supplied weapons, being provided all the logistics and instruments of war. You still see, despite the agitation for Biafra, the British ambassador, the French ambassador, the American ambassador all keep going around preaching one Nigeria, why the country must remain united. In your thinking, you might think that they are doing it because they love the people or they love the country. No. The reason is because they are able to put everyone together and use the most vulnerable and the weaker people to control everything, including development. That is why you see them, because if they allowed you self-determination, for example, you could decide to say, hey, I don't want to be importing food from the UK. I don't want you to be buying the oil with your colored paper. Go to hell. We don't need it. But if they put the same people that sold the slaves to them the same way they did during the slave trade, then they have their way still, which is what is happening. So when you see wars in Africa, do not think what they tell you is the truth. It is never about resources. It is never about money. It is about European and American interest, their ability to incite wars, and then the lobby group of the weapons makers, because they want their salaries to be paid as well. So they go to their governments and use their governments to install puppets and lackeys in those places. Those are why you see a government like Nigerian government will close down schools because it has no money, but will have billions to buy weapons, even when people are hungry. Those are the type of people they want in power. They don't want any sensible person. And unfortunately, the descendants of former slaves, the blacks, the Negroes in Europe and America, do not even know what is going on. That is why you never see a war, and you see some of them, the likes of Louis Farrakhan and other people who claim, like Omar Johnson, talking about Pan-Africanism or other nonsense. You will never see them coming to say, hey, my brothers, what is going on? Can we even know what you guys are fighting over? Because the Europeans understand that the moment a Negro is given food, that's all he needs. He just sleeps. He doesn't care what happens to his neighbor. They have no sense of brotherhood, no sense of fraternity, and that is the biggest challenge. Let's move forward with Biafra. If we again reference the New American Encyclopedia, a popular dictionary of general knowledge, it was written in 1870 by George Ripley and Charles A. Dana. So we'll see what it says about Biafra as well. It tells us that Biafra is a kingdom in the western part of Africa, on the bay or bight of the same name, that is the bight of Biafra, in Upper Guinea, between the kingdom of Oari and the river Gabon. It is intersected by numerous wide river channels, which are the outlets of the river Niger, what they call Niger Delta today. And the country between Benin and the capital town, Biafra, forms the delta of the Niger. The tract near the shore is low and swampy, but in the interior is elevated region of the Cameroon Mountains. The principal rivers are the Gabon, Cross, and Malinda, and the place most resorted to by European traders is Georgetown or Nango, on a creek of the Gabon, about 45 miles from the sea. Landa was the first to demonstrate the existence of several mounts to the Niger, since in descending that river he left the main channel and arrived by a branch in the Bight of Biafra. Then he goes on to say Bight of Biafra, an inlet of the Atlantic, forming the eastern part of the Gulf of Guinea, on the western coast of Africa, between longitude 5 degree and 10 degree east, and extending from Cape Formosa on the north to Cape Lopez on the south. It contains the islands of Fernando Po, Prince, and St. Thomas, and receives the waters of the Cameroons, Malemba, Moni, Old Calabar, and several other rivers. If you have followed the Biafra question in Nigeria, you will see the European treachery in the whole thing. In the war between 1967 and 1970, the Europeans provided the justification for attacking the new republic, as they were taking in the so-called minorities with them. So they divided the country and chose where they felt was Biafra and where was not. But unfortunately, because they think they are super smart, they forgot that, oh, okay, if you have captured the side that was not part of what you were fighting for, you should stop and allow those you think are part of it to go on. But they did not. Despite that, till today, that's the only thing you hear them say. Oh no, it is the Niger Delta that is our problem. But one single question everyone fails to answer is the fact that the Europeans buy the oil, the natural resources, with colored paper called dollars. That's all they pay. It's not like an exchange of what we have and what we don't have. No, all the Europeans do is they take the oil, destroy the environment, that if you go to Niger Delta today, you will cry for the people there. So they take the oil because for them, those are slaves. Remember, the slave ports were in Calabar and Bonny. So as far as Europeans are concerned, these are still slaves. So that's all they do. That's all they know. This is why you see the war coming each time the people agitate for liberty or freedom. The Europeans supply the Fulanis with weapons and say, hey, kill them. That is why you see in Europe, for example, they hold a referendum for Scotland of only 6 million people. But the moment they hear Biafra, you see the British ambassador jumping around everywhere in Nigeria trying to incite war. That is the only way they can get to use the weapons they make. They are the makers of weapons of mass destruction. They are the more violent people. But then they pretend to be, oh no, we are making peace. We want you to stay in peace. But then, because there was mainstream media, imagine if there was no internet today, there was no YouTube, you wouldn't hear this. You would believe whatever they tell you. Anyway, let's just make progress. So if we reference atlas accompanying Reverend C.A. Goldrich's Outlines of Modern Geography, published in 1856, we see the map of what was Africa or Negroland then. We see Biafra there once again. And then we also look at another book published around the same time called Phillips' Introductory Atlas of Modern Geography, written by edited by William Hughes. And we see in the same map, in another map, that Biafra was there as well. Now that we have been able to show you that Biafra existed prior to the creation of what is called Nigeria today, and that the problem is that same ideology of slave trade, the British and Europeans are still using the same people they used for the slave trade to subjugate and enslave the Negroes and Negroids there. In the closing remarks, let us look at the same book we referenced before, published in 1714, and what it says about Biafra then. It's gonna form a very good basis for the next part of this series. It tells us that the inhabitants of what was Biafra are the most addicted to magic of all the Negroes, by which they pretend to raise storms of rain, thunder, and lightning, and for that purpose they sometimes sacrifice their children to the devil. Lewis says they are very subtle and great robbers, that they dye their bodies with several colors, and their kings chalk theirs to render them the more beautiful, and that they worship the sun, moon, and trees, as well as the devil. One of the things we're going to look at is how they could have been worshipping the sun, the moon, and trees, and then the devil. But then when they make sacrifices, they sacrifice their children to the devil. We had previously been able to show that the allegation of human sacrifices is a lie, is a fabrication of the Europeans and the Americans, the slave masters themselves, and never held any orders. But that being the case, in subsequent editions we shall look at these statements because they were made in several places. We hope we have been able to at least give you some thought-provoking ideas that will lead you to research these issues further, so that tomorrow when you hear the Nigerian government killing people because of Biafra or self-determination, you don't think it is just about country or black people being stupid. It is just that the Europeans are using the same people they used for the slave trade, and unfortunately the Negroes and descendants of former slaves in places like America do not understand what brotherhood and fraternity means. The likes of Jesse Jackson or Louis Farrakhan will never come to say, hey, what is going on here? Why is there war? We are the only people without a home, and if we had any homes, it would have been in these places where the slave trade happened. Can we know what is going on? They don't do that because they all understand and accept the fact that they enjoy the slave trade. They enjoy slavery, and there is nothing anyone can really do about it. But we hope we have been able to enlighten you anyways, and hope you also find time to conduct your own research. Thank you very much for listening. Shalom.